At the time of this recording, I recently celebrated 26 years in my career and in the financial services industry. I have a lot of colleagues now that weren't even alive 26 years ago. And of course, I feel old saying that, but time is time. The number of times around the sun is the number of times around the sun. And when I look back at all the conversations I've had with clients over these years, 26 years, maybe 2,000 conversations a year, so 52,000 conversations in my career. Some of the most challenging are emotional conversations. Now, I've been through the dot-com bubble inflating and then bursting. I've been through the subprime mortgage meltdown where I actually worked in mortgages as it was melting down. I've been through the panic of '08, and then most recently, and we don't necessarily have a name for this yet, but I'm going to call it the coronavirus crevasse. So with that in mind, I've dealt with a lot of emotional conversations. You have probably dealt with them too, and you will in the future. So I want to give you a few ideas and a process for handling them. Now, I'm not saying after all these years that I'm immune to being emotional in response to someone else being emotional, because I certainly am. What I want to say, though, is that I can go back to my 4-step process in order to be clear about what I need to do to make this a successful conversation. I'm going to use the example of being emotional because your candidate for president did not win. And we have recent experiences with a lot of people whose candidate didn't win. And in this being an election year, we can foreshadow to the conversations we're going to be having with clients if their candidate doesn't win. Because one thing we know for sure, while we don't know who's going to win, we know that one candidate is going to win, and hence one candidate is going to lose. So I actually can remember back both to Trump being elected, which there were a lot of upset people, and also Obama being elected, where there were a lot of upset people. So here's the 4-step process, and I'll outline it, and then I'm going to walk you through it. I'm going to do a dialogue with myself on this episode of Conversations about Conversations. Number 1, get agreement on what the objective is in the conversation. What are you trying to accomplish? What needs to happen? Which leads to the second step, which is getting a clear, complete, and mutual understanding of what needs to happen. Third, agree on potential next steps for what needs to happen to satisfy your client or your prospect's needs. And then 4, agree on that actual next steps. So agreement is the fulcrum, if you will, for getting through an emotional conversation. It also is the fulcrum for getting through non-emotional conversations, but here I'm going to give you an example of an emotional conversation. Now, this was when Obama was reelected. I had a client who sent me an email that said, "I'm on the ledge, talk me off the ledge." So I call, and he says, "Yeah, I'm so upset. My candidate lost. I don't see a reason to invest anymore. It so bothers me." Now, this was the re-election. And so he already had evidence that the person in the White House wasn't going to destroy his wealth. But when people get afraid, when they get emotional, objectivity goes out the window. So step 1, agree what the conversation is for. So I said to him, "What is it you'd like to accomplish?" Now that's kind of matter of fact, straight on. I could have said, "Tell me more. You sound upset." When I can, I want to use their words. So if he said, "I'm so upset," then I'm going to say, "You sound upset. How come?" Part of my process, of course, is always asking open-ended questions. You can't really control a conversation or get agreement or gather information without asking lots of questions. So step 1, agree what it's for. So I might say, okay, well, you said talk you off the ledge. You wanted to talk to me. Again, I am not clear on what you want to accomplish. And he said, well, I feel like selling everything. I feel like I need to just sell everything until my party or my candidate is in the White House. And I said, okay, so you would like to talk about this? Yes. But I want to be clear, Mr. Client, before I continue, do you want to take action right away? Or do you just want to talk about it? When you're seeking agreement, you do have to mix in closed-ended questions to get a yes or no. And you do want to look at different vector points for the conversation. So right there, what I did was say, does he just want to talk about it? Or does he want to take action? That was a vector point. And then I can move on to step 2 because I get agreement. He says, well, I just want to talk about it. One of the ways that you can assess, and you do need to assess how emotional that they are, is asking questions like that. Like, do you want to take action? And usually it might say, well, I feel like taking action. And then I say, well, are you willing to talk about it? Are you willing to have a conversation about it? And almost always people say, yes, that's why I have you as the professional that I work with. Great. Okay, that's step 1. Step 2, what are your clients or prospects' needs? So, Mr. Client, what exactly do you want to happen? Now, I use the word want versus need. I would use those, I would mix them up until I hear where they're at. I use want because I hear a feeling in that question, like I feel bad, I feel frustrated. So I use want, and he's like, Mr. Client's likely to say, well, I want a different outcome in the White House. Okay, I get that. But what do you want in this conversation and in what I can do as your professional that you work with? His wheels are going to turn. He's going to have to think about it a little bit because he hadn't thought that through. He just wants to take action. He wants to hit someone, break windows, jump, take action. But the action is not thoughtful action. It's emotional action, and it won't really solve his problem. So I'll take some time to understand and say, okay, well, I get you are upset about the outcome, but what is it that you want to have happen long-term? So I want to elongate the time frame of thinking. I want him to see the forest, not the trees. I want him to be thinking bigger picture. So I want to ask questions that take him bigger picture. So he might say something like, well, what I want is, and this is what most people would say, I want to grow my money. And I think this administration is going to hurt my wealth. They're going to increase my taxes. They're going to take from me. So there's that real fear of loss mentality that the client has. So, okay, so you feel strongly that you don't want your wealth destroyed. So let me ask you this. Is the action that you're thinking of taking going to help your wealth or maybe hurt your wealth? And that's where, if they're coming with you in this and they're not in their emotional child state, they're able to calibrate that and say, well, yeah, I guess I can't see a reason that this would actually help me. It might make me feel better, but it wouldn't necessarily help me reach my objectives. So I guess one of my needs, Ivan, is simply to be heard. I'm like, got it. I mean, how many people, all of us humans actually, want to be heard? Very much so. So number 1, a need, want to be heard. Well, what else do you need to have happen, Mr. Client? He probably has nothing else to say other than maybe he could say something like, well, I need to recheck my financial plan and see that I'm on track, right? That could be something he says. But I think for the most part, that's step 2. Agree on what your client or your prospect needs. Like if you can agree on what they need, you get agreement and you're on the same page. So far I agree he does want to talk about it, doesn't necessarily want to take action, but he's on the fence. And I agree that what he needs is wealth. What he wants is to feel differently than he feels. So the third step is to talk about potential solutions to address those needs. And I might say, well, is this conversation helping? So that's a closed-ended question to design to get a yes or a no, because I want to know where I am. And in the conversation I'm thinking about, ironically, was with a client who it wasn't the first time he kind of went down this direction. So I knew to remind him of that. But in that conversation, he says, well, yeah, one solution is talking it through. I said, what other solutions do you see? Now, this is an interesting way to kind of turn it around. Most people will foist their solution onto their client or prospect. Instead, and I often do put forth opportunities, but instead of that, taking the opportunity to say, what do you think would address your needs, is a very different conversation. So he said, well, talking it through would address my needs, and I suppose taking a little time before I do anything hasty. So then I'm left with just agreeing with him. That's right. Talking it through, number one, best. Getting objectivity, talking with a professional like myself, number two. Number three, thinking it over. And then what I like to do is have a phrase that I have arrow in my quiver ready that has worked in the past. And I might say something like, I haven't really seen emotional decisions work out well in the long run. In fact, not even in the short run. I haven't seen them work out well ever. And people reacting to external events versus proactively following your plan and being disciplined and adhering to the plan, those things work, whereas reacting emotionally doesn't work. So anyway, I agreed with him, and he said, you're right, I should sleep on it. I should give it some time to think it over. And I said, great. So now, fourth step, agree on next steps. So, okay, so you're going to think it over. Do you want me to follow up with you? That's one way I could go. Closed-ended question to get a yes, no. And I'm actually suggesting my next step, which is I'm going to follow up with you, but I want to get buy-in to that. Now, if I went open-ended, like what would you like to have happen next? Instead of pinning down a specific course of action, I would be keeping it open and find out the array of possibilities that the client has on his mind. In his case said, let me think it over for a couple hours and then you can call me. So I said, great. It's 8 o'clock right now. I'll give you a call at 10. So it's a very concrete action plan to deal with this emotional situation where the client was angry, upset, frustrated. I like to say the generic emotions are mad, sad, glad, and scared. Of course, glad is the only one we feel good about. Mad, sad, and scared, we don't like that much. He was mad, sad, and scared. No, maybe he wasn't. Yeah, well, okay. So then fast forward to the next election, and not only were people mad and sad, they were very scared. And you could say, this being an election year, people are already mad, sad, and scared. Not a lot of glad. We need glad. So that's the 4 steps. Agree on what the conversation is for, what you're trying to accomplish. Agree on what the other person needs in the conversation. Agree on potential next steps. And then agree on a specific next step until you get something that is a specific action with a timeline with it. You don't really have next steps agreed upon. So that's what I want to say today in this conversation about emotional conversations. I want to thank you for being part of the conversation. I, by the way, have a whole book that talks about conversations. In fact, it's called Conversations, How to Manage Your Business Relationships One Conversation at a Time. It's available on Amazon. There's going to be a link to the book on Amazon in the description of this video and audio. I want to thank you once again. Appreciate you and everything you do.